huge cost and difference compared to just a few years ago when you were sharing PSOs, public safety officers, and there was different roles being utilized. And now you have a dedicated 24/7 ambulance. So that was the first jump.
Certainly respect that and respect your comments, and I get that. That doesn't change the fact that we need to look at the detail. Josh had some questions earlier about not wanting legal fees, not wanting this or that included in it, and until we see it, we don't know if that's the case. So we just can't approve a number like that until we have the details. So hopefully we get that and we can go through it, and in one of these next meetings in September, we can still get it done by the end of September. But to the comment that we just work out the language, that's not the end of the story. We have to see the budget, at least a preliminary budget that's going to be plus or minus 10%, 15%.
Well, we can't share it with you until we see it first, because we
Don't disagree with you.
we can't see it in details until we actually have a meeting next week.
I guess
So it's
that's-
gonna have to, it'll have to, it's gonna have to be, we'll have to wait a little bit.
Well, I think we've been patient for 9 months, 8, 9 months.
When I came in here, I told everyone I was gonna ask for budgets early. I pushed hard. Now we're having a meeting next week Thursday.
Appreciate
So we're trying to get it moving as quickly as we can.
Because we don't want a repeat of last year where all of a sudden we're doing everything else at last minute, but it's just like we're really pushing the limit.
We go through the same process, so we understand.
Yeah.
Has there been discussion, and I missed a couple of the meetings, but when you, again, are publicly talking about the large jump in percentage, I just pointed out one thing, which again, we want you to see the numbers, but has there been discussion, because I'm pretty sure there has, about how the percentages in your share in the last couple of years has stayed at one level when we have seen, a continued growth at the village level? I think we've kind of shared that with the town and how our number each year has gone up and yours has stayed.
We've shared it anecdotally. I don't know that we've gotten details behind it, but yes, you've shared anecdotally that that's happening.
And I hope that, it would be my hope that your citizens are seeing, the difference in response times and availability for crews too. That's one of the things that we want to make sure that's happening just from an operations standpoint, that if you're getting seeing an increase that you are, that you're seeing and feeling the effects of having full-time staff and an ambulance out the door in under 2 minutes, and faster fire services since fire doubles in size every 60 seconds. We want to make sure that your citizens are seeing those quicker response times and the services for the money that you're paying.
Everything you're saying makes total sense, but at the end of the day, we all know it comes back to taxes and paying for things. And when I talk about a 48% increase in the budget, if now that we've included population, it may change a little bit, but the numbers that you sent to me on Tuesday and prior to being just staying at the 2-component formula, that was about 50% of the budget was going to be the towns, which means we're going from 250,000 this year to potentially 500,000 in 1 year. That comes back to, we don't have that type of increase in our budgets, so we're going to have to find it somewhere, either through debt service or tax increases. And we all know what that means in talking to people. People look at their bottom line. So not saying anything you said is not accurate. Not totally respect everything you've said, and you guys do a great job. So none of that, but we all know it comes back to that piece of paper you have to write the check for on December 31st.
To your point, yes, we just want to make sure you know the services you're getting. And I think I offered 2 meetings ago, when we get to the point that this would be appropriate, I'd love to come present our numbers, our township numbers to your town and show you our response times to your community so you can be aware of the services you're going to get, whether that may or may impact your decision on continuing to work with us. We just want you to know what those changes have been so you can know the value of your dollar value. Because I know my services, sometimes I'm willing to pay a little bit more depending on the service that I'm going to get. If I'm getting the same or lesser service and I'm all of a sudden seeing a 40% increase, guess what, this guy's gonna be like, nope. But if I'm seeing a change in service that's improved potentially, and so we want you to be able to see what we actually have. I don't want it to be lip service, I want you to see the numbers, and I want you to know what our staffing is.
And you, this is just me saying this, obviously, we have an input, but you may very well get that opportunity, because we may very well have the discussion with our constituents, and we certainly would be invited. My opinion, we have to figure that out as a town board, but they're certainly not opposed to it.
But I just wanted to know, wanted you to know we're more than willing.
I think it's important, like you say, to let our community citizens understand all aspects of this.
I would go about 4 steps further on a bunch of this, just to kind of recap. I know we're getting way off track of actually making production, but we kind of took a budget off ramp here. If the village is requesting that we pay essentially 50% more for the level for our service, I would do more than invite you, and I would request you to come to our public hearing, because there is no way that we have the intimate details that you have that you're then presenting to us as a board for us to ask the people for a 50% tax increase on that level of service. To that point, your budget for 2025 was $718,000, which should have, I would assume, included that full-time interval or what the cost of service was then. So we're really talking about the difference between 2025, I'm not even accounting for 2023 or 2024, just specifically this year, your budget was $718, and if we're going to $1,002,000, I mean, that's still a $350,000 a year increase that we need to be able to justify one way or the other, or have some information on where it comes from. So if you were full-time in 2025, that's kind of the message that we've gotten, is that you had 3 people in the station be able to do those calls for service, is what is the difference or the delta between 25 and 26? Because we don't have a budget, and because we haven't really been given anything other than that lump sum amount, we have nothing to judge it by, which makes it hard for us, number one, to even digest, but 2, to put any sort of analytical thought behind whether or not we can do this. Above and beyond all of that, to the point of the response times, I would surely hope that if you're offering that you can look between 2020 and 2022 for your response time to generate a report for every individual average call, fire EMS and village fire EMS in the town, and be able to compare that and put, no offense, this is not a personal anything, this is a strictly business level thing, push money where your mouth is, that it's half as slow, if you want to call it that, or you've gotten twice as fast. That decision on how fast you want an ambulance to come is a twofold, one for the village and one for the town. We do not have, I will tell you right now today, we do not have $250,000 to pull out of our ear to give to the village for fire EMS. So this is absolutely another levy increase request, or it is debt service. One way or the other. We cannot absorb $250,000. If you were to come back and said $50,000, yeah, we probably can figure out how to make that work within the confines of what we're doing. There's absolutely 0 chance that we can do this without either a vote from the public or debt service, period. I'll go to the bank on that one. We cannot do it. Our budget is $1 million to begin with. We can't have a 25% increase because last year we asked to exceed the levy to get to where we are at $1 million. So they're fundamentally, this is my concern, and it has been since I was at your tour of your joint budget and village board. That is my concern. Is we are limited. There is very little legislative power that we have at this point as a village board or as a town board because of the village numbers that have been proposed. So I don't know, and I can't figure it out. I asked Mike last week when we met, and he said that it's essentially still 3 people, just like it was this year. So I ultimately have no idea where to come up with $300,000 worth of expense in $1 million budget that isn't staff related if staffing isn't changing.
Your request is completely understood, and you'll learn when we provide the numbers that there is not a full and complete depiction of the 2025 being fully staffed full-time. There was still transition built in there, correct me if I'm wrong, where we were still doing PSOs that were supplementing, and that partially came out of the police budget, partially was fire rescue. So you wouldn't get a true look at the numbers until actually this year, this upcoming year, because we were still transitioning from staff, like we talked about the PSO model, which I respect and worked under for 5 years, over to complete full-time on the fire side. So that number that you're talking about and some of the confusion as to, you know, why then the $350,000 jump. Now we're actually cleaning it up because it's gonna show all fire, where some of it was shared previously. And when we get into numbers and the board is able to get to the point where they can approve it so you can see it, we'll be able to detail that out and to your, you know, to your hopefully liking, where you'll understand that we haven't had a 350 jump solely this year, you know, to keep the same service. So we'll be able to explain that in more detail. Again, because our budget under PSO, it's like my salary. Part of my salary is fire rescue, part of my salary is police. We were doing similar previously because of how the PSOs were being used, so we'll be able to show that.
From a budgetary standpoint or an actual deployment of cash?
I think it was
Actual.
Yeah, I think it was.
You had PSOs active in January 25,
In January 25, there were still PSOs, yes.
besides Paul.
Besides Paul, yes.
Yeah, we had
At almost a double pay rate, you know, for those small budget.
we just had a couple that just one went to the sheriff's department and one left. I wanna say sometime in the spring, so they were still budgeted and still planned for, and that's why there's some discrepancy in those numbers. But again, we'll learn that based on your request to be able to show why there's such a difference, and show that it's not just a 350 jump from the status quo now to the same status quo last year. And I understand that as a taxpayer, I respect that request, so.
So getting into the village side of this, and I completely understand that you have to go through your process, at least do some initial vetting and all that kind of thing, but if the goal is to have this done by September, the agreement done by September, one of the biggest white elephants in the room is this annual cost. It's not the language. This language we can argue over for 2 weeks and either agree to disagree, agree to include it, or agree to change it. It should be able to be done within 2 weeks. That part I'm not worried about. It's the $1 million figure that's floating around. And I don't know if the village has had any sort of comprehensive conversations about this. If you back fund it from general fund to balance your budget this year, $140,000, $70,000, $80,000, whatever that number was to make it float. I understand that cost shifting from PD to fire and EMS essentially is, ultimately that's what you're doing. Whether or not you end up backfilling that with more LEO or not is a village consideration only upon itself. But the cost shift from PSO to fire EMT is legitimately a cost shift. That's part of the reason why I was mildly in favor of it, because there were things that came along with firefighter EMT and LEO splits, in the PSO model and the public safety model, that benefited the town and we were paying for it. Now we're shifting that cost over to firefighter EMT only, which becomes more of a burden in the town. I understand from a business standpoint that makes sense from the village, but at what level, sat in meeting, had a conversation about LEO and whether or not there's a future for the police department. At what level does the village stop and say, can we afford either one or both of these levels of service? Levels of service, not the service itself, but the level of service that's being provided. Obviously, PD went full-time, daytime to help offset a whole bunch of other related things, but at some level, you had $180,000 general backfill, and if you're going from 718 to $1,004,000, again, $300,000 delta. I don't know, that may explain a whole bunch of how this all plays out.
Some of it.
What percentage of the LEO or PSO to firefighter EMT shift actually happened? Because that's still your peanut under the plastic helmet. But how do you fund the additional monies that go into it? Potentially, it came up in our meeting not that long ago about the public fire shift from tax bill to water bill, and that may open up the threshold of all of this stuff. And you guys may be able to play the peanut under the helmet game and make all of this work, but at the end of the day, 50% of the cost of this department's funding comes from, again, 3 guys who have very limited length of leash on doing any sort of legislative decision. So while it may work for you on paper, and it doesn't work for the town, that becomes a village problem that no longer works on paper. With $500,000, $400,000 walks away from the equation. That's the part that I wish we could have drilled into over the last 6 weeks or so, because it's super important. The language, like I said, I've said it before in other meetings, we can work through the language, but the financial burden piece of this puzzle is not going to go away. And quite frankly, it is not really our decision.
And I've been a part of the village meetings and I've heard the challenges that they're, you know, some of the same. I realize there's differences between the township and the village but they're, you know, some of the same challenges in the last couple of years of finances related to it. I mean, it's being talked at the state level, the county level, and I'm sure you're very well aware if we've talked in other meetings, these small communities, prices for, you know, for essential services like police, fire, and EMS, just, you know, this is not a Town of Palmyra or Village of Palmyra problem, it's everywhere. It's just that it's on our shoulders and your shoulders for your respective town to try to figure it out.
Yeah, well, a state solution is 5 years off at best, and a county solution is 2 years off at best. So at the end of that, we're at the end of the term of this whole thing to begin with. And if there's a community that goes bankrupt as a result of it, one way, shape, or form, it doesn't help anybody at all.
And people have been, you know, I point to the Sun Prairie story that was just in the headlines where they eliminated their EMS service because, you know, they contracted with Sun Prairie and then Sun Prairie just offered them a 500% contract increase after they eliminated it. And now they're like, well, maybe we should go back to having our own EMS service. We couldn't afford it before, but we certainly can't afford a 100% increase. Hundreds of percent is the word I'm looking for. So again, it's not just a here problem, but we're tasked with the village and the town figuring out how to deal with it here. So.
Have you plotted the time, first shift, second shift, third shift, or when the majority of calls come in to determine, I'm not saying we don't need 24/7, but have you done a diagram, plotting, and where are the majority of the calls, and is it equally spread out throughout all 24 hours? Is it concentrated? You don't have to answer it tonight.
No.
It's just a question, has that been looked at?
And I can tell you that Dan and Mike are gonna be the guys, you know, because they're fire and fire only, they're gonna be the ones most qualified to tell you that. I can tell you from a historian standpoint of over the last 8 years of working here, we tend to be, you know, busier different times of the year because of schools. And also it really, it's a challenge unlike some communities where we can hone in on second shift is the busiest. You know, when school's out of session, because we're a small community, it changes completely to when school's in session, then our busy time changes, if that makes sense. We have looked at all that, we even looked at that from a PD standpoint, it doesn't apply to this per se, but we have to constantly be looking at that because we're tight budget-wise as well to reallocate services for when we're the busiest, or when we have the most calls.
If you have any analysis on that, I certainly would like to look at it. I certainly would like to see what that breakdown is.
To speak from the fire side, to follow on also, we've not done a specific analysis on what time of day, and that's within what shift. However, we've done the time studies over the last 3 years. I just finished up, almost about 2025, but I'm going back as far as response time. But that's certainly something that we can go and look at it, you know, and see if there's something more specific there. But one of the things that we have seen is now we're seeing some metrics that are starting to show with the community itself and the citizenry with respect to both the town and the village and the aging, you know, the aging of the community, the citizens that live here, and some of those needs. So we're actually starting to see some of those and internally look at, you know, what do we need to do as far as our responses to some of those folks in the town and the village and their needs. But certainly we can pull that number together.
I think looking at the split between shifts from a fire and EMS perspective would be a decision point that we all need to look at. Certainly we all would love to have 24/7, but it comes down to the cost benefit, right?
Right.
So not saying that it shouldn't be, just saying the more information we have to make a decision, the better off we all are.
Fair, and that's a fair question. I think one of the things that we have to kind of go back to is the difference between that, you know, a shift to shift per se, but from the fire side of it, because there's a lot of unknowns there, whether you go from minimum staffing of 2, which is what we're working with now, to 3 or 4, which is what we'd like to do, which still leaves us, you know, in a tight spot, but that, you know, gets us in a better position. With the township, having a staff of 2 is actually almost not feasible, it's not a workable situation because of the fact that we gotta bring extra equipment and water out to, provide fire service out. So really, logistically, having a minimum staff of 3 is ideal, as a baseline, for township response. So not so much for EMS, but certainly fire. So, but to your point, getting some of those additional metrics would be helpful.
Sounds good, thanks.
We did have, one point that we were making as a group here that I think we should point out again, we've said it to you before, is that part of the reason the switch occurred related to the fire department and the full-time staffing was lack of availability for volunteers, which we've seen here. Don't want to insult your intelligence because you guys are super smart and sharp, but we just seen that nationwide shift. And that's one of the reasons that the village is having, some of the financial tightness that they're having. We wouldn't have necessarily chosen per se to not have volunteers to be able to volunteer for us 24 hours a day, 365. But we're just seeing a nationwide and statewide shift of lack of availability. So, use my history here. 8 years ago when I was here, we had 10 plus volunteers on the books that were coming in and helping supplement, to which now we just don't have that at all. I wonder if we have just a couple, 2.
Yep.
So that has changed the village staffing model, and so we can, even respond to calls in the village and your township because of that. So that's been another struggle. We're contacted frequently by our neighbors saying, we don't have staffing. We don't have coverage tomorrow. Can you help us out? We don't have this. So, I'm not going to publicly make people look bad or use names, but maybe in a closed session we can give you some of that information, just to be able to provide to say there is truth to what we're saying, that our neighbors are in the same position we're in and are struggling getting a fire truck and an ambulance out the door with people on it, and that led us to some of the staffing that we have. So.
And I'm not suggesting that you go down the same path of failure as other departments are experiencing with that. But at the same point in time, there is a level where that's an absolute ultimatum that has to be made, right? So if the folks of Town of Palmyra decide that $250,000 more a year is something that they have zero appetite for, we've got 2 problems. One is a functional problem. Who are we going to in September, then going to go to for service that may be more applicable on a financial basis? But the other part that I feel like is bounced off a bunch of times and has not been heard is what level of service is the community or communities willing to provide, right? So if I'm going to pick one because it's adjacent this direction, that if Kettle Moraine doesn't have people in the station in Eagle, is it the town and village of Palmyra's problem to back fund their staffing and have 3 people here that could go there because they have 0? That's my struggle.
No, because then you're paying somebody else's, so you're exactly right, right? That is a conversation that the village, I will tell you, is having, even right now, we've had it at the board level. How many times do we go to, and I don't want to use a name, but do we go to a place before we're supplementing them with town people and with village? Because if we go supplement mutual aid, we're doing it knowing that when we go to the town for a structure fire, we're hopeful that that department will show up and help us at your big structure fire. But if it becomes to the point, and we were talking about this at the village level, where we're providing services for them, then it's a big problem, as you pointed out, and we're supplementing them and giving them better service on your backs and on the village's backs. So you're 100% correct.
100%. So there is some market average, right? I'm going to date myself and say, are you Barry Bonds? And are we going to pay for you to be here, right? Or
I know what Barry Bonds is.
which one? The giant or the pirate? From that standpoint though, it's good to hear that the village is discussing that.
Absolutely.
We've had no direct feedback on that. We talked at the last meeting, we talked about, do you have a staffing plan in place for 2026? Because that is another thing, that, no offense to you or your budget or your proposal, but the village board could say, we don't have the money, Paul, go back and figure it out with 200,000 less. Whatever that discussion may be, the problem is that we're here now, and you guys are starting budgets, and we're here now, and we're also knee deep or neck deep in entire thing. So your staffing plan and what you're willing to support may be all well and good, again, until that 50% partner from the financial standpoint of this whole thing literally can't afford it anymore. You know, and that needs to be a strategic discussion that at some point in time decides internally, and whether you're doing LEO and FD, EMT, whatever it is, like those are the reasons why we've asked to have a voice at the public safety committee. You know, like be part of these things from what's the other end of the telephone line sound like, hold the string tight and let's have a conversation and not make decisions in vacuums.
Great points and good comments.
You wanna move on here?
Right items, it seems easy at this point.
I think we kind of agreed at the last meeting to cut out some of the middle language. At least we talked about it. Josh, you got updated.
So this is kind of the culmination of that conversation from last time. The village shall have, the village shall conduct annual tests of dry hydrants in the town, skip down a whole bunch of lines. With the annual testing done, it did say by the village fire department. Tonight we added in each spring to kind of put some frame of reference in season. All repairs found necessary for the dry hydrants will be the responsibility of the town. The reason why it's suggested each spring is so that then we have decent weather to be able to repair them, still have them functional, yada, 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 as spring season pulls through, grass fires, whatever it may end up being, rather than you guys testing them, you know, December 15th, and then we gotta call an excavator to fix it in the winter time, all that type of thing.
Where do you guys usually test them?
We try to do it in the spring. Yeah.
So,
Well, you've been running them, haven't you?
What's that?
Mike told me you have.
We have,
four or
yeah,
five times.
the one, yeah, and well, actually, we've hit all of them, so, to my knowledge, we haven't had any other issues. It's certainly the one that was repaired, recently, that one looks great, so. We have alternate, you know, if by chance there's something that happened later in the year, we have alternate ways that we can certainly get water out of that same site. The dry hydrant is certainly the easiest way. But yeah, we try to do it early in the year, as soon as there's,
That's,
you know, opportunity.
so adding each spring is, it falls within their schedule, that's
Certainly workable and it's not an issue.
reports, I believe last time we talked about setting up upon request, I think we talked about annually. Are you still okay with that?
well, not too nitpicky, but I thought it was annually at the end of the sentence. But,
If we care where it is.
well,
The end of it's fine.
no, just reading the sentence is like, you know, annual. So,
This hasn't changed, so I'm assuming you're still good with it.
Oh, I think that B is the same language as the current contract, so I assume you're okay with that.
it hasn't changed, then.
Hasn't changed. C,
This one we also left kind of open and said we were gonna wordsmith something together between my comments, Rob's, Mike's response at the last meeting. Try to get, again, my goal out of this would be to get more of a look of how are you doing and not who. That came out wrong.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Positions versus.
Is it firefighter, EMT,
Right.
PSO, firefighter?
Getting a list
paramedic,
that says Jim, John, Julie, and Jeff doesn't really tell me much anything in comparison. So Mike had suggested potentially using the org chart, which would say, you know, 15 part-time EMTs, 15 part-time firefighters, blah, 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 whatever, and then kind of like, if you want to call it a roster of who those people are and what
We'd be more than willing to work with you guys on that. A lot of that is a matter of public record too, as you know, so we're more than willing to make that happen for you guys.
thank you.
So I had asked about right of first refusal going in for joint, again, this is jointly owned vehicles, so we're talking about 29, the 06 ammo, the 07 truck, and the, forgive me, 07 fire truck and the 07 brush truck. I asked that in the grand scheme of things, the agreement had said it's up to the village on use and ongoing ownership or sale. Ultimately, if the village decides that it's not worthwhile to keep something, that the town would have the ability to purchase said equipment if they felt it was beneficial. Whether it be, again, the 29 because it's the antique of the community, or potentially the 07 if we retrofit it to put a plow on it for the airport out here, whatever kind of situation like that would come up. I crafted this, we reviewed it, our attorney has not, okay? Other than the fact that he was in the room. So it says, in the event that the village determines there's no longer use for a jointly owned vehicle,
That's Stan will have to look at it too.
Yes.
the town would have the right of first refusal for said equipment. In such event, the village shall provide notice to the town, including a copy of the current insurance valuation of the vehicle, an executable purchase agreement within 30 days. The village, in receipt of the village's notice, the town would provide written notice back saying whether or not we want it. And if we do, then within 30 days of that, we would give you a check for the town or the village's half of the value. Again, our attorney hasn't reviewed it. I completely understand that whatever we hotshot through tonight, your attorney's gonna look at as well. The fundamentals of this is that we would have the ability to purchase equipment that's jointly owned rather than you choosing to put it on Wisconsin surplus and it's gone and we get a check for $1,200.
Fair enough.
So if there's modifications to the effect, I think, so we should.
Legal support, that makes sense.
Do you currently have a insurance valuation, for your insurance coverage? Obviously, you have an evaluation. Do you have current value of the 4 vehicles?
I think we've
I think
seen.
we had a recent,
Is that something you can share
I think we
with
might
us?
have a recent update last year.
Yeah, I think I've seen something from the insurance, whenever we,
Forward that to us?
yeah, we can ask for it.
So in big picture, moving forward, B becomes C as a result of putting D in there. We asked a list of the department, this was in the agreement to begin with, a list of the department, all the department fire and rescue vehicles. We including their individually insured values, which I'm assuming that if you've got rural or whoever, or go through an MPIC, that you've got a schedule and then you've got an aggregate number over the top of it, and the property and the open and all that kind of stuff. So it should just be a function of pulling it out of that. Again, with the list of the vehicles, that those vehicles just have what the current 2025 insured value is. And that way it kind of eliminates part of that. Question came up because it said with regard to the 2 jointly owned vehicles in service, are 3 of them in service? The brush truck, the ambulance, and the
tender.
engine, or
Yep.
tender?
Yes, they're all in service.
Okay, so we fundamentally should change that to 3
Yes.
instead of 2. Okay. With respect to the responsibility of 1/2 of the cost of the repairs, we're requesting that the village notify the town in writing of what those costs would be, and not that we just get a $30,000 invoice for something that we had no idea was going on. So prior to any repairs, we just get a copy of the estimate that says the ambulance broke in half and we need to replace half the ambulance. Right? And that the town would have the ability to, if need be, get their own quote as well for the set repairs.
We have to get 2 quotes for the village, is that, you wouldn't accept our quotes, or?
Well, it wasn't in there at all.
Doesn't say we would, it just says we'd like right to do it, not saying we would.
Realistically, I understand that there's only a limited amount of service providers for things that